everyone, Jason here, and I'm back with part 2 of my El Toro coaster cutout video. Now if you notice here, it looks like I've gone backwards a few steps, and that's because I have. As we get ready to paint the model, as I mentioned in the previous video, some of the stuff is going to be easier to paint if I have the coaster semi-disassembled, not completely, but partially. And so I have the stand completely taken apart over here. I've taken the wheel assembly off the bottom. I've taken each of the lap bars off, and I'm also going to pop the bolt head off the front here really quick so that I don't have that on as well either. And so this is what the coaster looks like in its current stage. Now the first thing you want to do when you start painting a model like this is decide which era and which train you want to paint. I rode the A train in the current era, so I want to paint it to look like that. And so you'll want to go out and find reference photos, as many as possible online. So I went and found photos from Inside Great Adventures and Thrilling Moment Photography on Instagram that kind of show me the train that I'm going to be painting. If you can find photos inside the station of the details inside the train, that's really nice as well. However, if you've ridden El Toro, you know that they have a no loose article policy, so it's really difficult to get a phone or camera in the station unless you're a ride operator. So those photos are extremely hard to find. I did find one that kind of shows the back view of the train there, but other than that, it's really hard to find. Also, I'm not the first person to paint this model, and so I've gotten some references from a few other people that have painted this model. If you want to go look at Block Breaks on Instagram, this is her model. Very talented, turned out extremely well. I hope that mine turns out that well. She added some things to hers as well. So those are some things we're going to look at. You'll also want to make sure that you find the right colors of paint and materials. So I have some paint brushes here that I picked up at Walmart. Also a handful of paints and stuff. So I chose chestnut for my brown. It's kind of the more golden brown color that you see on the train. And so we have that, and we have some other colors here. These paints sell at Walmart for about $1 each, and most of them last multiple models. So the chestnut I actually used for the seats on the new Texas Giant model, and so this is what's left of that. So we'll be using that. Blacks and whites and grays are pretty much in all of the models, so once you buy those colors, until you run out, you can keep reusing them. So you want to make sure you have as many things possible before you jump in and get started. So let's dive right in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've actually decided I'm going to stain the stand rather than paint it. So we're going to start with the bottom. So the bottom I'm going to do is a darker stain. This is the same stain I used on the base for new Texas Giant. And so I'm just going to get a little bit of stain here on my brush. And right now I'm actually staining the bottom of the piece. The El Toro logo is actually on the other piece. The nice thing about this stand is the base is the same each way. So if you just stain one side of it, you can stain the bottom, and then if you don't like it, you can always flip it over to the other side and stain the other side, or paint the other side, or do whatever you want to the other side. You kind of have a practice area. The other thing you want to make sure you do is make sure you cover your surface. So when I did most of the coaster models, I put this paper down. This is just moving paper used for packing stuff. And I've done this for all of the videos. It works really well for when you've painted things. However, if you're going to be using stain, it will bleed through the paper. So I've actually put a garbage bag on the table beneath this, so that if any of the stain bleeds through, it won't ruin my table any more than it already has, because it already has bled through a little bit. My wife's pointed that out a few times now. I'm going to rinse the stain off there, and now I'm actually going to get a paper towel and use it to remove the excess stain from this base plate. And it's going to give us a little bit of a color like that. I'm actually really liking the way that looks. So when I did new Texas Giant, I layered it on a lot thicker than I have here, and so it got really, really dark. But I actually like just how it is, just subtle like this. So I'm going to come on here, and I'm going to come around the edges and stain them as well. And then we'll wipe away the excess once again. Like I said, the nice thing with staining it, especially for a wooden coaster, is that it kind of keeps that wooden coaster look and feel. And so it kind of keeps it looking kind of rustic, like a wooden coaster does, for at least the support. If you have the full coaster train, it'd probably look really cool if you found the right color stain and stained the entire track rather than painting it as well. But ultimately, I really like the way that looks right there. So I think we're gonna keep that. And I think I'm gonna also stain the other stand pieces as well, that same exact color, because I really like the way it turned out. We can only do one side at a time, ultimately these, because we do have to let them dry a little bit. So we'll get our brush back over here, come back in, and we'll just stain each side of these. And then once again, we'll get a paper towel and we'll rub off the excess stain. So the stain that I'm using here is dark walnut that I picked up at Walmart for about $5 for this can. The other one that I thought might look good is called Weathered Gray. It kind of looks like the coaster supports, but maybe a little bit too light. And so I didn't really know how that would look. So these are the two I was going back and forth between, but this is the one that I settled on. So now that we've stained each of these pieces, we'll flip over the other sides and do them as well. And then we'll remove the excess. And then we can let the pieces dry completely. Even the first side will take a little bit longer to dry, but we can just let them dry completely now, sitting off to the side. And now that we've completed the stain on the base, let's move on to the actual coaster car. Now the first thing I want to do on here is start with one of the colors that I'm going to be using the most. And that's for the base cover. It's going to be this brownish color. So get some of this and we'll just put it out on our paper. And so this is going to be most of the train. And I'm even going to paint even over the areas that are eventually going to be covered in gray, these stripes, just because it's easier if you just get full coverage. And then we can paint, let it dry, and then we can paint the gray over that. So throughout painting, I like to have a cup of water handy, also a few different sizes of paintbrushes, and then my paint. So we'll just kind of get started here and just kind of go around the coaster model, at least up here, with this brush and lay on this brown paint. Now I want to lay it on kind of thin. Also, there's a little bit of a texture with the El Toro where the wood grain goes side to side. And so I'm going to try to only paint that direction, just back and forth, so that it kind of leaves that texture in the paint. I looked at the car really closely, and it's really just a solid color with the grain. There's no other colors helping create that grain. It's more of a texture. And so we're going to just kind of go back and forth like this. You may also notice some of your engraved lines are disappearing. You don't want them to be completely filled in, but as the paint dries, it usually dries a little bit thinner, and your lines will be revealed again. That can help you paint your white. So let's just keep going over this one side. We also want this to go up higher, above the seats as well. Kind of work our way around the front as well. Like I said, you always want to have your reference images handy to double check where you're painting, make sure that you're painting areas that should be the color that you're going. We're also going to be painting some of the inside of the train with this same brown color as well. Mostly the back of each seat and also the back of this front section are going to be the same brownish color. So now that I've gone around and gotten pretty good coverage with the brown paint, I'm actually going to go around with a smaller brush and try to get into some of the smaller areas that also need that brown paint, especially down inside of the train. Some of the sides and such that I wanted to do brown, that brush didn't fit into. So with the smaller brush now we can just kind of go around and do the final touch-ups in the very fine areas, as well as get the edges again. The edges, since they're burnt, do require like an extra coat of paint over them if you want the color to match. Otherwise it's going to be about a shade darker than without, just because, like I said, the burnt edges, just when you're painting on a black or dark brown surface, it's going to be darker than just painting on the light wood surface, unless you do a few coats. And so we're going to go around and get the edges a little bit better here as well. There we have pretty good coverage of the brown all the way around. You can see I kind of got it in areas that it shouldn't have been as well, but we're going to be painting over that stuff anyways. You just want to make sure there's no runs or bubbles when you get in there. But now that we've completed the main color here, we can kind of set this off to the side, and then we'll work on painting something else. Now the next piece we're actually going to paint is going to be the wheel assemblies. With most of the wheel assembly, I'm going to actually just paint it solid black. This is underneath the train. And then in the actual wheels, I have a silver metallic here that I'm going to use, and I'll probably mix a little bit of black into it just to darken it a little bit for the wheels, but we'll use that for the wheels. So we'll start here though with just solid black. So we'll get some of this out. Then we'll get our brush ready and just dive right in and start painting this. while I have just the straight black, I'm also going to do the other undercarriage piece here. So the front has the circle, the flat piece, so the square with the circle in it. We're going to paint that black. Eventually we may add a little bit more detail to that, but for now we're just going to paint it black, and we're going to paint the rest of this black as well. And that should finish up the black, at least for the wheel assembly. We'll probably also paint the bottom of the coaster train black. We'll have to see when we finish this if the rest of the coaster train's dry enough to flip it over and do that. Now, something you may or may not have noticed during assembly is that on the back of this piece here, there's actually one of those double tabs that we didn't ever hook onto anything. You may think that there's something missing because of that, but there's not. That's actually for the multi-car train. Eventually there would have been a piece that hooks on there to attach the different vehicles together. But because this is only the lead car, it doesn't come with those pieces to be able to attach all the cars together. It's just not necessary. Now, checking my train here, it looks like it's pretty dry. So we're actually going to flip it over right now too, and then we're going to paint the bottom of this black. To do that, I'm going to use a bigger brush, so let's get a bigger brush ready here. I want to make sure we get all the brown paint cleaned out of it before we do this. Now we can use this bigger brush and just get a lot of black paint, just kind of go over the whole thing pretty quickly, at least in the middle. May switch back to the smaller brush for the sides. We're running out of black paint, so we can get a little bit more out. And then for the edges underneath, we'll switch back to the smaller brush, just so we can kind of get right up against where we've done the brown without going over. The big brush is great for getting wide coverage, but not very good for details. So we can just use this brush now to fill it in. Now the other thing is, I actually don't know what the underside of El Toro looks like. I wasn't able to find any pictures. I've never been down in the maintenance bay, unless you're a maintenance worker, but at the end of the day, this shouldn't be the focus. So I think you do want to paint it, just because if you happen to see an angle where you can see the underside of the train, it might look kind of startling just to have the raw wood. But by doing it black, it's just dark down there. It doesn't really distract from any of the rest of the coaster. So there we have pretty good coverage of the black inside there. As we let that dry, we can set that back off to the side. Now, as I mentioned, for the actual wheels, I wanted to do silver with just a little bit of black. So I have this sterling silver paint here. This one's a little bit more expensive at Walmart. This one is like $2, I think. But we'll get a little bit of this out. And as I mentioned, we want to mix just a little bit of black in, so I'll just get a little bit of the black paint here, and I'll come over and I'll stir it into the silver. Maybe a little bit more, pick up a little bit more and come over here once again. And this you really want to do enough of it to do your entire wheel assembly, just because you don't want to have to try to mix and match again. If you're going to mix colors, you want to mix quite a bit. Now I'm only painting, these little itty bitty wheels here. So I'm not going to need a ton, but now that I have this silver, I can just kind of come in here and go over each of these wheels. We'll start with just the faces of them, and then you'll also want to go around the edges of the wheels and then the back as well. Now after painting the wheels on the wheel assembly, you're probably going to get a little bit of the silver over paint onto the black area again. So I'm actually going to come back to the black here with just a little bit of paint and go over it just a little bit once again, just right to the edges. Because ultimately if the black overpaints onto the silver a little bit, you're not going to notice it as much as if the silver overpaints. So we want to make sure we just kind of get all of that silver paint covered back up. The other thing to remember is that a lot of this is actually covered. It's going to be up inside of the train, and so we really only need to focus on the bottom portion. And I'm just going to kind of go right in here and just use the black paint to go right up to the edges of the silver, but not overlap it at all. So that's kind of what the completed wheel assembly is going to look like there. Like I said, mostly black with the silver wheels. And there's the second one as well. So we'll kind of leave those off to the side and let them dry as well. Now one other thing I do want to do with the silver while I have it, I mentioned at the front of this, so there's this black piece that also had a little circle engraved on it. In the corner, in each of the four corners, there's actually a little silver bolt. So I'm actually going to get my smallest paintbrush here. Let's see if we can get this cleaned up a little bit. My kids have been playing with my paintbrushes, and I can tell. But I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to try to do a little silver dab in each of the four corners. Just kind of like that, and have that be bolts that are on that piece. So the next piece we're going to be painting is going to be the lap bars. So the lap bars are going to be two different colors. So the bars on the side, or the arms that go up, are going to be black, while the actual piece across is going to be orange. We'll start by doing the black, and so I'll just hold on to the little armrest here, or the little lap bar rest here, and we'll just get our black paint and paint these arms all the way around every side of them. We'll do this with all 6 of the lap bars right now. Now I've completed painting the black onto the lap bars now. Before we switch over to the orange, I'm actually going to go back to the train now and do a black detail on here. So these brown, or the pieces that go around the neck here, you notice I painted them brown on the back. But if you look at the actual train, so they're brown on the back, but then they have a black pad on the side. And that's why I didn't kind of paint all the way around. But now I'm gonna get the black paint with this small brush, and we're gonna paint just around these evenly and finish these off in black. And so now we're gonna start with one of the finer details here. And it's really nice to hop back and forth between pieces because the paints do dry relatively quickly, at least to the touch. They take 24 hours to fully dry. But by switching back and forth between pieces, we can let those lap bars dry a little bit while we work on this piece, and then switch back and finish those while we allow this to dry. And so that's kind of what those neck rests are gonna look like. So there's one other section inside the train that's gonna be black, and that's gonna be part of the seat. So part of the seat is red, part is black. I'm going to do the red part first before we do the black, because the black is just gonna cover it up. And so we'll kind of do it all in red, and then paint in the section that needs to be black. And so I'm not gonna waste my time doing that now, because ultimately it just won't work as well that way. So we'll put this back off to the side now, and we'll switch back to the lap bars, and we'll do the orange section that goes over the lap. So for our orange, we're gonna use this Apple Barrel Harvest orange color. We'll start with the first restraint we did. Once again, using our brush, we'll just grab this and we'll just go over the little lap bar. And once again, with the orange, you'll wanna go over the burnt edges twice probably to get good coverage, maybe even 3 times. So we'll actually do the edges first, so that we can do them last. Because like I said, this paint does dry relatively quickly, at least to the touch, to the point that you could then layer it on a little bit after. So that's kind of what it's going to look like. I'll probably do a second coat of the whole thing, but I'm going to go through all 6 of them, and then I'll come back to the start and do the second coat, just to make sure we get it looking very bright orange. And so there we have the lap bars all done. I feel like we got pretty good coverage on the orange. We may let them dry completely and then come back and do another layer. We'll kind of see what it looks like at that point. So the next detail we're going to jump into now is the seat. And for that, we're going to be using real red. This is the same color I used for the X2 track. And I don't know if I have enough of this. I may have to get a little bit more to finish it. But if you look at the seats, there's a detail on the back. There's a rectangle and then the seat piece. We're going to paint everything outside of that red, and then ultimately we're going to fill that in with black. So we'll grab our brush here though, and we'll just start probably just down on the bottom seat here. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to probably paint a little bit into the middle, cover up, go a little bit over the lines, but then we'll be a lot more careful with the black when we come back and go over it again. We also have some brown splatters inside of there from painting before. Like I said, you know, the first step you don't have to be as careful, but then later on you'll have to get a little bit better coverage and be a little bit more careful with future. So hopefully you can kind of see in there what the red is looking like in that first seat. I'm going to continue that with the second and third seat as well. And like I said, you can see the few places that I missed in there. That area is ultimately going to be covered by black as well as some of the red, so I'll clean that up with the black when I get to that point. And so that's how our red inside is going to look for now. And like I said, that's going to look a lot better once we get the black all done. But we'll put this off to the side and let it dry. And we'll switch back to the orange now and do just one more coat on these lap bars. Like I said, this one's a little bit harder to get good coverage on. But if we go over these a few times here, letting it dry a little bit in between, this orange will really end up popping a lot, which is what we want. These orange lap bars are very bright. Now for the next detail I want to move on to, I actually want to do the gray trim on the cars. You can actually see it is engraved in the cars. You can see that through the brown. However, to help me with this, make sure I get this line straight, I actually have some painter's tape here that I'm going to use. This is something I haven't used on any of the other coasters, but none of the other ones have had details like this. And so I'm going to first do the vertical lines on one side. You can't, I mean, you probably could have been, you could mask it all out if you took the time, but I think it's going to be easier if we just focus on one type of line at a time. So I'm just going to put this tape on here and press that down, and then we're going to go across and mask all of this just really quickly, and then we can paint the vertical lines, and then we'll proceed to that point. So that's kind of what it's going to look like masked off there. Now for those lines, I'm going to be using granite gray from Apple Barrel as well. I'll squirt some of this out. So this is a very light gray, which is what it looks like they have on the train. It's not quite white, but it's also not a very dark gray. So we're going to use this one here. So let's get the paintbrush all cleaned off, make sure that all the orange paint is out of there. We don't want any orange mixing with this. Now we can get some of this paint and just kind of go right here. And this is the color we're going to want to do a couple of coats on. This is going to be on top of the brown that we've already done. And so as it dries, most of the paints start to dry a little bit more translucent than they go on. And so as it dries, it gets a little bit darker because of the brown undercoat. And so we're just going to kind of go over it again as it dries here. And then we should just be able to take this tape and peel it straight up. It looks like we did get a little bit of bleed underneath the tape. It didn't work perfectly, but it worked pretty well. Now I may try, use a little bit of bleed, I may try to use the brush and just do the horizontal lines and see how that goes. We can always go over it with brown again if we need to, and so we'll just kind of go along the horizontal lines here and see if we can get these looking right without having to use the tape. Decided to freehand the design on the rest of that side. I'm not sure if it worked better with or without the tape, but ultimately that looks pretty good. I do need to probably go in and touch it up a little bit with the brown after it completes drying. There's a few places that the gray got over into the brown. So I want to continue painting the gray trim around the car. However, if you look at the back, you'll notice that there's nothing there. But on the actual coaster, there is a design there with the gray. I think it's just because they only etch one side of the wood, and this side, the front side has the seats on it, so they didn't etch it into the back. So most of it I'm going to freehand. However, on the back I am going to go back to using my tape here because I think this will be easier to help me create a straight line. I think for the rest of it I can just try to follow the lines as close as possible with my brush and just be very careful as I do it. However, I don't feel comfortable trying to freehand it without any lines on the board. So I'm going to first do the horizontal lines. So I'm just going to come back here and put this piece of tape on here and smooth that in. And then I'm also going to get another one for the top where I want this to go. And so as I said, I'm just going to do the horizontal lines right now. So we have that there now, and we can use our brush here. I've replaced my brushes here with new ones now, so hopefully we can do this a little bit better. The old ones were getting a little bit worn out. Bristles were starting to fall out and things like that. And so able to buy a 25 pack of brushes from Walmart for $5. They're really not expensive. And so the brushes I was using were the same ones I've used on every coaster cutout up till now. They've lasted quite a while. My kids have used them as well. So they probably haven't been taken all that well care of either. But we can just do that. We'll do that line. At the top, I only masked one side of it. So coming up underneath the seats, I just want to be careful there that I just go straight across. So it's going to look like something like that for now. Eventually I'm going to come back, peel this off, and I'll do the diagonal line as well as the vertical lines. There's also a small horizontal line that I'll probably try to freehand down a little bit lower that you'll be able to see after I peel this away. But before I peel it away, I'm going to let this paint dry a little bit and come back over here to this other side and touch up a little bit of what we did yesterday. Now we'll move on to the front of the car. Just there, same border and then the diagonal line through the middle. And a lot of this will actually be covered by the bullhead, which we'll get to in a little while. But I'm just going to start by painting this trim. The square trim around the edge will not be covered at all, but a lot of the diagonal will be. So there we have the front done. I went a little bit into the brown area. Some of that's going to be covered by the bullhead, but I'll actually probably go back with the brown once I finish all of this gray and do that. Also, when I was doing this, the tape actually caught on the table and it peeled off on the back there. So I pulled it away, but you can see my two horizontal lines are looking good there. And it also feels pretty dry now. Now the other side lines, I'm probably going to try to freehand. So just kind of come along here on the edge and paint this. So that's kind of what the one edge is going to look like, and I'll try to repeat that on the other side. Once that dries, I'll use some tape to do a diagonal line across the back, similar to the diagonals on the side of the car. So that's what the horizontal and vertical lines on the back are going to look like, at least as of right now. I think that's probably pretty close, and then we'll just do the diagonal. Moving to the other side, we'll kind of do the same design we did on this side, but on this side now. That side should be pretty dry. We're going to let the front and back dry, and then we'll come over here with a brush and we'll fill in the rest of that. And so we'll go back to the back now with our tape, and we're going to create a diagonal across it. And so this is something we're going to have to just kind of freehand, and hopefully we get the thickness where we want it. So I'm just going to put the first piece of tape on here, just next to the two corners that I want the diagonal to connect. Press that down. And then we'll get another piece, and this is the one we'll have to make sure we space equally on each side. So I'm just going to grab this. So you can see we have our diagonal taped off there. And now this should actually be one of the easier things I've painted, because we can just go straight between the two pieces of tape. Don't have to be very careful with this one. I press the tape down hard, so hopefully we don't have any bleed. So yeah, we just kind of painted it like that. Let it dry for a minute, and then we'll peel this tape away as well. Now for the diagonals, I actually think that the tape adds a lot of ease to doing that. So on the side over here, I'm actually going to try this as well. I didn't do this on the other side, and some of the diagonals turned out pretty sloppy. And so I'm going to come over here on this side now that I just painted. We'll start with the middle one because it looks like it's already dry. And I'll just put this tape here along the one side of the diagonal. And I'll put another piece of tape along the other side of the diagonal. Make sure it's pressed down tightly so we don't get any bleed. So it's going to look, so our back tape just peeled off, so you can see how straight that line is there, which is what I'm going for on the other side, on the side as well. So on the side over here now, I can paint that exactly the same way. And if this works, I'll probably redo the other side with the diagonals just to get them perfectly straight. So I've painted that now. I'm going to let that dry for a second while I actually mask off the next line. So we'll mask off this back line exactly the same way. And then come here with the brush and brush that on. Now we'll peel away this tape from the first one we just did. So as you can see, that's creating a lot crisper diagonals than that there. So I'm going to do the third one on this side, and then we'll eventually get back to the other side and go over some of the gray with brown and then redo that gray, just like I said, to make it. Now another area on the side that has just a little bit of a gray trim is going to be right up in here. So this is actually a handle here that we're going to paint chrome, but around this trim we're just going to take a brush. In fact, I'm actually going to switch to a smaller brush for this. So we have a smaller brush here. We can get just a little bit of this gray paint and just go in here and trace right around the edge. And we'll do that on all three of these. And so there you can see the gray is completed on that side and the back. And then we'll do a little bit of touch up on the front and the other side. And like I said, to do that, we're going to want to go back to our chestnut paint here that we have to try to fix some of that. We may or may not need more gray, we'll see. But we're going to continue using a small brush here for the touch-up, just because it allows us to get into tighter areas. So first I'm going to go over some places that I've gotten some gray bleed onto the brown that I didn't want it. Now to redo these diagonal lines, I'm just going to repaint brown over the entire thing. So I'm going to use a little bit bigger brush for that. And so we've covered those up again, and we'll let that dry. While that dries, I'm going to move back to the front and do a little bit of touch up on the front with the brown. So I think that looks pretty good up there now. So while we continue to let the brown dry over here, I'm going to go back to the gray and do the little trim around these top pieces like we did on this side over here. So we got the small brush again, and we can come back in here and just come in here and paint that. So that brown's taking a little bit longer to dry, and so while we wait for that, we're actually going to do a couple of other things. First of all, the red inside the train, there's a few burnt edges and things that I didn't get great coverage, so we're going to do a little bit more of that. We're also going to do another coat on the orange on the lap bars. They've been drying overnight now, And so hopefully we can get a lot better coverage with that now. So first we're going to do the lap bars. So I'm going to grab a little bit bigger brush here. We'll grab one of these lap bars and just get some orange paint, and we'll do all 6 of these really quick. Now for the red, unfortunately, I'm running really low on it. I ordered another one today, and they were out, so they replaced it with another color that's not even close. I think it was like cappuccino metallic brown or something like that. I don't know why they thought that would work. And so I'm just gonna try to get some out of the bottle here. And hopefully we have enough to finish this. If not, we may have to hold off on the red and finish this on a later date. I'm hoping that's not the case though. It looks like we are getting some out of the bottle here, and like I said, there's only a few areas that really need touch up with the red. Now we're going to use a smaller brush to get into some of the finer areas where we need to do the red as well. So we've gotten the red all touched up inside now. Now we're going to come back to this side over here where we painted over the diagonal lines, and I'm going to mask them off again just one at a time, and we'll repaint those lines on. So as you can see, the tape helped that turn out a lot more precise there. So we're making really good progress here so far. So the next color we're going to dive into here is shimmering silver. So shimmering silver is going to be used on these handles up top. It's also going to be used on the floor of the train, and also we have these silver runners just where you step in and out of the train as well. So I'm going to start with the floors inside. I think that'll be the easiest part with this big brush, so we'll just kind of go in there and start brushing the silver in there. Give it a nice metallic sheen. So there you can see the floor on the front as well as those runners done with the metallic silver. So I'm going to do that with the next 2 rows as well now. So now that we've finished the floors as well as the side runners in the metallic silver, The next thing I'm going to do is actually paint the little handlebars that go between each of the seats in that same color. And this is going to be the last silver we paint until the final details. And we'll get to that later. But there's going to be some bolts and stuff that we're going to just kind of dab on in the silver paint as well. Let's just go around very easily paint these handles in silver. And I'm going to do this with a smaller brush. There's a lot of small little gaps I have to get into. It'll take a little bit longer with the fine brush, but it's worth it for the result. So there you can see the metal handles all completed as well. Now there's a few more things we want to do on the train for sure. I'm still going to do the black on the seats as well, some small details. But before that, I'm actually going to shift gears over to the bullhead a little bit. And that's because this is going to actually take a little bit of work, and we're going to have to let some drying happen in the middle and stuff. But the first thing I actually want to do, I have a little electric sander here. And I'm actually going to just kind of round the edges a little bit on the bullhead. Most of the train is pretty boxy, however the bullhead is kind of sculpted. And I'm not going to completely sand it round and stuff like that. I just wanted to add a little bit of shaping to add maybe a little bit of depth, hopefully, to the bullhead. So I'll just use this and grind off a little bit of the edges. Just the way these models are done, all of the edges are kind of flat. So we'll do this really quick. So hopefully you can see there, just the edges are a little bit rounder, softer, not quite as squared off. Now when it comes to coloring for the bull's head, it's actually probably a fairly difficult color to get, and there's some shading and stuff in there, so we're going to do that second. But to start, I'm actually doing a mix here. So I have a little bit of the champagne gold, the chestnut that we did the brown on the coaster, and then a little bit of this rich espresso glitter paint. And so I've mixed these three together. If you look at the bullhead, there's a little bit of a gold sheen in there, but also kind of some brown. And so I feel like these colors are pretty close to it. Also something that will go well with the coaster. And basically the whole bull face is the same color. So I'm just gonna come on here and I'm just gonna go over it with this paint. And I'm not going to paint the entire back, but I did sand the horns a little bit more to kind of give a little bit of separation from the wood. So I'm going to paint the back of the horns, make sure we get good coverage on that. I don't know that you'll be able to see back there very well. There's not going to be a lot of separation, but just in case you can, I want to make sure that I get everybody. Now to hold this, because I do have to paint around the edges, I've actually got the handle of one of my smaller paint brushes and just stuck it in one of the eye holes. That's where it hooks onto the coaster, but I should be able to just hold the piece with that as well. Make sure we get that all covered. And so that's what our head is going to look like so far. Like I said, I'm not done. We're going to come back and we're going to add a little bit of shading and stuff. I'll probably lighten up some areas, but we'll let this dry for a little bit and we'll switch to another part of the coaster while we let it dry. So while we're waiting for that to dry, I'm actually going to switch to doing the black in the back of the seats here. So as we mentioned earlier, the backs of these seats are black. So I have a fairly wide brush, but I want to be careful. Make sure you have good lighting to get down there so you can just kind of follow the lines. This is one of the tougher things probably to paint perfectly, just because you don't have room to really mask it very well. and black is really hard to cover up if you go too far. And so you just want to be very careful. Make sure that you stay inside the lines in there, but paint this black centerpiece. Without it, the seat's just kind of look incomplete. So there we've kind of done the first seat, as you can see, and I'll just kind of go around and do the rest of them really quick. So that there is going to finish the inside of the train. Now switching back to the bullhead here, I've actually added a little bit more of the champagne gold to my mixture, and I'm going to lighten this up just a little bit and try to get the horns. If you look at the bullhead, the horns are just a little bit golder than the middle portion, and so hopefully we can just add a little bit more depth to this by lightening up the horns with a little bit of gold. Actually looks very close to the same. Maybe I'll just get a little bit of gold and try to just overlay it over that very thinly. Just get a little bit of gold here on the paintbrush. And just kind of mix it in with what's already there. So that's what it looks like. You can kind of start seeing the multi-tone developing. We'll put this back off to the side and let it dry a little bit more. So one more thing I kind of want to do with the coloring of the bowl is I have a wet paintbrush here, and I'm going to get a little bit of this chestnut paint, which is the brown we used on the train. I'm just going to kind of brush this around the edge. By keeping it wet, it kind of makes it a little bit more translucent, hopefully. We'll just kind of brush this on the edge, provide a little bit different coloring to the bowl face. Like I said, there's some different shading and stuff on here, and so hopefully by doing it this way, we can get some of that different shading. Then I'm actually going to use a paper towel to dab it off a little bit. And then the final thing I want to do to the bullhead is it has a white nose ring. I've got a brand new white brush here. It's my smallest one. So this is actually the only white piece on the entire train, as far as I know. It's so small. But we're going to just get this very fine brush here. I don't even want a ton of paint. I just want to be able to kind of come in here very narrowly and paint this. So there you can see the nearly completed bullhead. The last piece of that is actually going to be the eyes. The eyes are red, but because the eyes are these pieces on the front, I'm going to wait till I have it installed to paint that red. So we're now starting to get to some of the finer details and also to the reassembly of the train. So to reassemble the train, we'll first start with the wheels. So I'm going to pop these wheels down into place. Now, one thing you may notice as you start putting the train back together is some of the pieces may be a little bit harder to snap in now, especially if you got paint in the holes, but they should usually snap in. But we'll push this in. So this one clicked, the one over here didn't click, it just kind of slid in smoothly because there was some paint in that top hole. We'll do that with the other wheel as well. Now we have the two wheels back on, we'll also add this under chassis back onto the train as well. So once again, like I said, this is maybe a little bit harder to push in. You're not going to get that click now that you had before because of the paint. But we should still be able to snap it in. And that's going to be looking like that. Now another small detail that's actually left off the model is the wheel wells are actually covered metal. So they were originally cut out round on the side of the train, at least when it was manufactured. I don't think it ever ran that way. And then they put a piece of metal in behind it. And so you can just very subtly see the wheel well wrapping around the wheel. And so to do that, I'm going to take a C-cell battery to kind of trace and make a wheel well on here with just a pencil. I just want it to be super light. So I'm going to put the C-cell battery right over where the wheel is here. And then I'll take this pencil and I'm just going to kind of trace around it. Like I said, this is going to be very subtle. It's not going to stand out a lot. I just kind of want to have that wheel well there. And I'll do the same thing on the back and then flip it over and do the other side as well. And so there you can just very vaguely see the wheel well. Like I said, you don't want it to stand out. It's very subtle on the train, but we have that there. Each of the wheel wells also have 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts around it, just kind of spaced. And so I'm going to take just the smallest brush here and get just a little bit of this metallic, and then we'll go around each of the wheel wells and just kind of put 4 little bolts right above it. Once again, this is going to be a very subtle detail, but hopefully something that adds just a little bit to the coaster model. So like that. And then we'll repeat the same thing on the other side. Now in addition to that, there's also 6 bolts on the back of each seat. And we'll just kind of replicate that with this metallic paint as well. So I'm going to do 3 above this headrest and then 3 below it. And you know, these are small details that probably don't matter that much. And a lot of people probably wouldn't even notice if they were missing. But you know, sometimes it's the small details that make the model feel a little bit more complete. So there you can kind of see the bolts on the back of the seats as well. Now the next piece we're going to do is we're actually going to reinstall the lap bars. When I first assembled the model, I didn't get them all the way in, mostly because they're actually really difficult to put in. But now I'm going to spend a little bit more time pushing them in. Like I said, these are really hard to get your fingers down in there, plus you're kind of pressing down at an angle because the bar's angled. And so they're really difficult to push down in. But you want to try to get them in as tight as possible. Sometimes rocking it back and forth will help you a little bit. And so there we got the first one in. I'm going to go through the train and get the rest of these in as well. So there we have the train reassembled, except for the bowl. So hopefully the bowl is now dry enough to pull it off the paintbrush there. So like I said, there's our bowl. We're now going to press this onto the front of the train. And hopefully you can better now see the shaping there as well as the different colors. I really like the way that turned out. Now the last thing on the bowl is that it actually has red eyes. And so we're going to use this red paint, the same red paint we used inside the train, to try to fill in the eyes. And they're not completely red, they're white, or red with just a little bit of white in the middle. As I mentioned earlier, I'm almost out of this red paint, so I'm just going to kind of use what I can get out of the bottle here, which should hopefully be enough, since it's just 2 little eyes. So I got a smaller brush here. I'm going to twist this on the table so I don't have any stray strands. I'm just going to put the red paint down inside of each of these eyes. And then with the finest brush, I'm just going to get a little bit, it's a wet brush here, but I'm just going to get a little bit of white paint, and I'm just going to drop that right in the very center very subtly. I don't even want it to be fully white. In fact, I may paint over it just a little bit too with red again. We'll just get a little bit of the white paint in there, just a little bit more water. Let that dry for a second. We may put a little bit more red in there as well. Like I said, we'll let that dry. And we'll move over to the stand. So the stand is something that I've had drying. As I mentioned, I stained the bottom, so the El Toro logo is actually on the other side. And I did that because I actually have a different logo to put on here. So to reassemble the stand, we're gonna do it exactly like we did before. Once again, this is stained. This has been drying now for 2 days. I know this video probably looks like I'm doing this all in one sitting. But I started this a couple days ago, and so I stained the stand already, so it is dry. And so there's our stained stand reassembled. Now, as I mentioned, I put together another El Toro logo. So this one's 3 layers of vinyl cutout. The orange flames in the background, kind of a golden yellowish tan color for the outliner on the letters, and the black letters. And so I'm going to use this transfer tape now to pull this logo off. And now we're just going to simply apply this logo to the front of the stand. And I do have a link to this logo in SVG format down in the link below. Either the whole logo or also the 3 layers separated that I cut out to do the logo. So you can go there and download it. But we're going to press this on, make sure we get it pressed on really good, and then we'll peel the transfer tape away. And that is our new stand for the El Toro coaster cutout. Looks really good, I think. I'm really excited about the way that turned out. Now back to the coaster. Those eyes have dried a little bit. I'm just going to come in here one more time and add just a little bit more red paint. Now one final detail I want to add, and this is going to be a very subtle detail as well, but there's some small bolts that were actually painted over in the light gray area. And so to do that, I'm actually going to get my light gray paint that we've already used to paint that. And I'm going to get a slightly darker gray and just mix in a little bit of it just to darken it, just one shade. So this is called elephant gray here. And so we can grab that, grab a small brush, and we'll mix this up just a little bit. Like I said, the goal here is I don't want these bolts to stand out a ton, but if we just go do dabs of the same exact gray, you're also not going to see them at all. And so this is just a slightly darker gray that we can go around and add a few bolts and stuff around on the coaster. Now to add the bolts, we're actually going to use our finest brush here. So we'll just come in here and get a little bit of this paint and just go around and put these bolts occasionally around the coaster. That's actually not dark enough. So we'll add just a little bit more of this. Like I said, I don't want this to stand out a lot. I just want it to be semi-visible as you look at the coaster. If you're looking for small details, some of these smaller details help finish it and sell the final product. So if you look really closely, you can kind of see those there. So that's going to complete the painting portion of our project. The last thing I'm actually going to do is actually a couple of decals. So on the front corners of the train, there's a little A1, and this is an important detail. This is the A train, as I mentioned at the start of the video. And so I've actually created these little decals here. I just printed them on paper. I took a photo and recreated the image, printed them on a sheet of labels, and then used clear contact paper over it to kind of give it a glossy edge. And so I'm going to apply these decals now to the front corners of the car. This is a detail that I thought was probably a little bit too small to paint. Could have used maybe just a white oval and then used like a black pen to write A1. But to get the font as close to possible, I wanted to trace it from a photo. So now I get to fight to get the backing off of this so that I can apply the decals. So I've gotten the backing off the first label now, and I'm actually going to use my tweezers here to help me apply this accurately here to the front corner of the train. And so there's our first decal applied there. Looks really nice, I think. So we'll peel off the backing of the second one as well and apply it. If this is something you want to do, I have linked a PNG, a high resolution PNG of this image down below. I don't know the exact size I printed it at. Actually, I printed it at like 15 different sizes just to find the one that I thought would look best. And I chose the one that I think works the best, but I don't know how big it is. So if you did it, you want to just play with it, get your sizing right. But I think I got it pretty accurate to the real train. And so there's the A1 on the other side as well. Now the last step is just to put the train back on the stand. So to do that, we'll put this piece back in here, and then we'll come back on here and snap it into place. And so there's the completed model there. Ultimately, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it looks fantastic. Like I said, painting these models really adds a lot of character to it. It's fun to put them together, but when it's just a plain wood model, it's just a plain wood model. But adding all of the paint and the stain and the decals and things like that can really make it come to life and look like the real thing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't, that's okay as well. I want to give a special shout out to Coaster Paradise on Instagram. After I did the Nano Coaster video, he reached out to me, gave me a lot of information about the different El Toro trains. He was interested in painting this model as well. He has the full train. I'm excited to see how that turns out. But I want to give him a special shout out for giving me all kinds of information that really helped complete this model. But if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching and have a great day.